Alright, in this video we're going to look at how to kick out of arguments. We're going to look at each argument type individually and how you're going to kick out of them. So, welcome to Kickout Camp. So, the first question is, when to kick out of an argument? Well, an inexperienced debater might hope that arguments just kind of go away. If you're not talking about them, then maybe the other team won't talk about it, and then the argument will just kind of go away and no one will ever have to consider it again. But that in reality, that's not the way it works. If you stop talking about something, the other team can capitalize on you not talking about those things and make it so that you lose the debate because you didn't answer something. So you want to make sure that you kick out of an argument. And what that means is that you no longer want to go for an argument as a reason for you to win, and you kind of just want it to go away so that it's no longer a part of the determination for the judge in making a decision. So you got to make sure to practice kind of knowing what kind of answers look like what, and knowing what the 2AC or the 2NC is doing in order to be able to know whether you can kick out of an argument. Because the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the answers that were given to your position, and then once evaluating those answers, then if you decide that you're no longer going to try to win with that argument, and you also don't want the other team from winning and beating you on that argument, then you are going to learn how to kick out of an argument. So, the first one we're going to look at is disadvantages or advantages. They're both kind of structured similarly. So, the first thing you have to do when you are looking at a set of answers to your disadvantage or your advantage is you have to diagnose what the answers are first. Are they defensive answers? Is it a link turn? Is it an impact turn? Is it a straight turn? Or is it an add-on? And each one gets its own type of kickout. Remember, the goal is to prevent the other team from winning the argument when you no longer want to talk about it anymore. So, the first we're going to look at is the disadvantage when it's just a defensive argument. So, we have our Frederick character here, and he's at the pit of doom. And defensive arguments are pretty easy. If you are 100% certain that they are just purely defensive arguments, you no longer have to talk about it, period, end of conversation. You can just move on and then keep on going. So, that is what a defensive looks like. So if they're saying non-unique, Frederick is heading towards the edge of the cliff now, you can concede that and say that that's not a reason to vote against you. That's just a description of the status quo. If they're saying that the fiery pit of doom is already on fire and already scary and already being terrible, then you can concede that too. If you're not 100% sure, then extend across your opponent's impact defense and their link defense that they have read against you. So they have said there's no link to the argument, or you can't solve that argument because of XYZ reasons. You could concede that, get rid of the link portion of it, and then the impact defense actually takes out the impact to it as well. Both of those, if you're not sure if it's purely defensive, can get the job done. If it is a link turn, so let's talk about this. So, remember, Frederick is just hanging out right now. The plan would cause Frederick to move over towards the cliff and ultimately fall into the fiery pit of doom. So, a link turn says Frederick's actually not hanging out right now, and he's actually tiptoeing or walking his way over to the cliff right now, and that the plan turns Frederick around and moves him in the other direction. So, if a team has link turned your argument and also read impact defense, so they would say non-unique, Frederick's headed towards the cliff now, he's not just hanging out, and they have said the plan actually makes Frederick move this way, and they have said this fiery pit of doom is not so fiery and is not very doom-like, then you concede the impact defense in order to get out of the link turn. So it means that you want to if they have link turned it, you want to concede impact defense. If they have link turned it, you want to concede impact defense. So if you said the economy is going well right now, i.e. Frederick's hanging out, plan devastates the economy, economic collapse causes war, and they said, actually, the economy is going down in the status quo, the plan makes the economy become better, i.e. link turn, and they have also said, but an economic collapse doesn't cause war, you can concede economic collapse doesn't cause war, and then you don't have to worry about that link turn coming back and being a reason why the other team should win. If it is an impact turn, so if they said the fiery pit of doom is not actually fiery or a pit of doom, but actually it causes a whole bunch of really good things, like if the economy example was here, they would say economic collapse causes no war, and economic collapse causes climate emissions to go down significantly, and that's the only way we're going to be able to prevent climate change. So that could be a climate change impact turn to an economy to said. Well, if they have read that as an impact turn, then you have to concede link defense, where they say the plan doesn't actually affect the economy. If they have that no link argument there, you concede that no link argument, and it gets you out of the whole impact turn debate. Because that's no longer a reason to vote for them, because now, instead of Frederick going off of the cliff, he just stops. He just stays there, because the plan doesn't actually change Frederick doing one thing or another, and so the debate about whether it's a fiery pit of doom or a great utopia is irrelevant, because Frederick's not going there no matter what. If they have been straight turned, and if you remember, a straight turn is when they link turn or impact turn you, and they do not provide any other defensive arguments. If that is the case, you're debating it. There is no kicking out of the argument. You're not getting rid of it. You are about to have a giant debate. And it is one of the strategic things that you have in your arsenal to straight turn things if you want to force a debate to be about something. So there are some people who like to straight turn economy advantages and impact turn them because they really like the economic collapse good-bad debate. And so they want that debate, and they're going to force you to have it. And so they straight turn it. They don't provide you with any link or uniqueness evidence that can get you out of that debate. If it is an add-on, it's a little bit different. So if you look here, we've got our diagram. We've got Frederick hanging out, but we've also got the little miniaturized version of it. Well, remember, an add-on is just another advantage that the affirmative chose to read, except it's in the 2AC at this point. And so if they've read an add-on to your disadvantage, then you are going to need to answer it just like you would any other advantage. So the clock kind of starts over on that set of answers that are the add-on. So if you can diagnose it, you can prevent them from leveraging that add-on to be able to beat you. So now we're on to counterplans. First, you always have to ask the following question when somebody reads a counterplan. What is the status of the counterplan? Usually it's going to be conditional, sometimes it'll be unconditional, you never know. Okay, but you do have to ask that first so that you can know what's going on. Second, you have to have the diagnosis of the answers. Is it a solvency deficit, a permutation, offense, or theory? Remember, the goal is to prevent the other team from winning on that argument when you kick out of the counterplan. So, the status of the counterplans. You got to know what conditionality it means, i.e. they will kick the counterplan and not go for it at any given moment at any given time. You no longer have to go for it whenever you so choose not to go for it. It's unconditional, means that you're going for it no matter what. P.S. If you read an unconditional counterplan, you can't kick out of it, or else there's a theory argument to be had there. So, If you do say unconditional, the kick-out question is probably irrelevant. If it's dispositional, there are conditions in which you are able to kick out of it, and however you defined it in the cross-X will dictate whether you can kick out of the counterplan or not. So, counterplans with the permutation. The origins of this are from when dispositionality was prevalent. So originally, you had to concede a permutation in order to kick out of a counterplan when things were dispositional, because the original definition of dispositionality was any theoretical reason why the counterplan was bad outside of dispo bad, and any permutation were a reason why you could kick the counterplan and get out of it. So, anytime you're doing that, you're going to look for a permutation. Anytime you're reading a counterplan and you're wanting to kick it, I just kind of, out of habit, go, extend the permutation. We're not going for it. It's a test of competition, not an advocacy change. We're moving on. Theory arguments. You got to ask in cross-X of the 2AC when they read theory against you and you've read a counterplan. You got to ask what theory was read and if any of them are reasons to reject the team. If they are reasons to reject the team, you're going to have to answer those theory arguments when you kick out of the counterplan. So, if you have the counterplan and you're kicking out of it, you've extended across your permutation, you still have to answer the theory arguments. And so you're going to have to answer those, and you have to ask them in cross-X to make sure that you don't drop any of them. You should always answer the conditionality, dispositionality, bad arguments. That's just kind of a have to, because once you start changing worlds, there's a potentiality of abuse stories being spun in the 1AR. And so it's good to just answer it and be like, conditionality is good. It does good things. And one thing you should always do as well is you should always utilize reject the argument, not the team. This is kind of one of those safe haven arguments that even if they win their theory arguments as to why the counterplan is bad, that you should reject the argument, i.e. the counterplan, but not the team. And so that's always something to kind of keep in mind and kind of keep in your back pocket. But when you're kicking a counterplan, you want to extend across the permutation, and then you want to answer any theory arguments that are there. Also, remember, if they read an add-on, you're going to have to identify that just like you would on a dis-add. Remember, same exact thing. And some teams will read add-ons as offense to a counterplan. So just make sure you're on the lookout for any add-ons as well. It's a good question to ask if you're unsure. Critiques. First, what's the status of the critique? Same thing. Got to have that same conversation. Is it conditional? Is it unconditional? Etc. You got to also be able to know, is it a solvency deficit argument? Is it a permutation? Is it an offensive argument, like a disadd to the alt? Impact turns, add-ons also would work here. Theory arguments. Remember, the goal is to prevent the other team from winning the argument. We've already talked about the status question. The same thing applies here. So you can kind of see above. Permutation. Same thing goes here. It's the same exact story when you're talking about the permutation on a critique. You want to argue that the permutation is a test of competition, not an advocacy change, and that you're no longer going for the alternative. So, extend across the permutation. We're not going for the criticism. Permutations are a test of competition, not an advocacy change. Otherwise, it makes the AF a moving target. Possible to beat. So, theory arguments, the same exact things have to go on. Is there a reason? Like, they might read some framework arguments that they might argue are reasons why you should be rejected as a team, i.e. reasons for them to win. So you always have to make sure you're on the lookout for framework arguments. There's also wrong forum arguments. There's a lot of different theory arguments. Utopian fiat bad is an argument. You want to make sure that you look for a lot of those sort of sneaky arguments that are theory arguments, and so you want to ask those cross-X questions to make sure you're on top of it so that you don't lose because of any of those things. Same rules apply. Always answer your conditionality, dispositionality, bad arguments. And always utilize reject the argument, not the team. If there's offense on the critique, you need to talk about why that offense would be sucked up or the link would still be triggered via the status quo or the counterplan. That way you can solve all of that offense as well. Or that only the critique alternative were to trigger something bad to happen. So if you're no longer going for that, then that bad thing would not be relevant in your decision calculus, because that bad thing won't happen no matter what you vote for once you have kicked the alternative. That's another option. So you have to be able to kind of isolate, are the impact turns something that is only triggered with the alternative, or is it an add-on that the alternative doesn't solve? If it's an add-on, a reason why the AF is good, then you have to be able to explain why the counter plan or the status quo also accesses the solvency to that add-on. Or if it is just something that is triggered via the alternative, you would say, by not going for the alternative, this bad thing will never ever happen, so it makes the debate back to square one, counter plan versus plan, or status quo versus plan. Topicality. Topicality you can usually just kind of get rid of and not talk about it, but there are these things that some tricky teams like to go for called reverse voting issues. They argue that because topicality is a zero-sum game, that it is an all at-risk argument for the affirmative but not for the negative. They argue that it's a reverse voting issue because they should not have to worry about arguments that are time sucks like topicality, and it should only be worried about legitimate topicality arguments, and you should vote against topicality and against the team for reading such cheating arguments like topicality. So you need a block to answer this, but generally you're just going to say things like time skew is inevitable. Even if I didn't read topicality, I could have just read a super short disad or a counter plan that would have skewed your ground even more, which means that your time skew is inevitable, and reject the argument, not the team sort of arguments would do well. But you need to have a block so that when you do kick topicality and there's these reverse voting issues, you have answers to them. The reality is they shouldn't be run anymore because they've sort of fallen out of favor in the community, which is a good thing. But just in case, you should have a block in your theory file that's like, hey, kicking topicality, reverse voting issues aren't an actual voting issue. Don't reject the negative team. So, closing thoughts. Kicking out of arguments is extremely important to your development as a debater. One, when you're affirmative, you don't want to defend too much for too long. The 1AR is hard because people don't strategically consolidate the debate. If you don't strategically consolidate the debate, it's going to be really, really difficult to be able to answer the 13-minute block in merely 5 minutes. So the best way to get around that and start making the 1AR a powerful speech that is trying to win the debate is to consolidate it. And you consolidate the debate by kicking out of arguments. And so that means kicking out of advantages, picking and choosing arguments on flows. So not only to kick out of arguments that you don't want to go for, but strategically picking arguments that force the 2NR to do certain things. Like maybe you didn't straight turn a disad in the 2AC, but the 1AR, you choose to go only for the straight turn. So the negative no longer has a choice in the 2NR whether they can go for that, whether they can go for something else or just that disad. It's those types of thought processes, thinking about where you want to be at the end of the debate and forcing those things to occur, that really makes you take a leap in your 1ARs. So, when you're neg, condense down in the block. You don't have to spend too much time kicking arguments in the 2NR. You don't want to have to sit there and be like, not going for this argument, 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 and spend 60 to 90 seconds of your 2NR just kicking arguments. You don't want to do that. You want to be able to get right to the nitty-gritty super quickly in the 2NR. And so it's good to sort of narrow down your options a little bit. I'm not saying all the arguments have to be kicked and your 2NR is already being spotlighted in the in the block, but you do want to narrow it down so that you don't have as many things to kick in the 2NR. Also, kicking arguments is the most important step in being able to be a strategically flexible debater in a debate. You have to know how to get rid of arguments. You have to know what makes arguments be able to be gotten rid of versus what you don't. And once you start knowing those things, you can start seeing what other teams are going to do as well. And when you can start seeing that strategic vision, then you can start trapping teams to do things that you want them to do, as opposed to not being able to.